Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 15. Let me get the PowerPoint going here. Okay, here we are. Okay, wonderful. Okay, we're going to be talking about qualitative data collection today. And so by this point in the class, you've reviewed quite a bit of methods, qualitative and quantitative. We've talked quite a bit indirectly about qualitative data collection, but haven't talked directly about it and sort of how you do it or how it looks. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here in this module here. So, okay, wonderful. Okay, so what is the process of qualitative data collection? There are various steps. The first step is really you got to have a qualitative research design. And the qualitative research design comes from the methodology. What methods are you using and how are we going to do it? The design is really sort of like, a good analogy is like a design of a house. You can't just construct the house. You got to put the plans together first, know what you're doing ahead of time. Well, that's exactly what a design is. So you're going to need the site. Where are you going to collect the data? How many participants are you going to have? What type of data collection are you doing? What type of qualitative data collection are you doing? Interviews, focus groups, participant observations. How are you going to recruit participants? Do you need homogeneity in the characteristics of the participants? A lot of times you do when you have purposeful sampling. Homogeneity just means you want them all to be, maybe if you're looking at something that has to do with maturity, you want them all to be around the same age. If you're talking maybe about gangs, maybe you want them to be all male or maybe all female, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing, etc. Okay, instruments, right? Do you have an interview protocol? What kind of questions are you going to ask? What are the questions that you're going to ask? If you're going to do observations, what kind of things are you going to be looking for? Things that are important to plan. How do you have rapport? Do you have entry into the site? Do you work there? Does somebody important work there and is going to be vouching for you? Something you got to talk about, something you got to consider. Number two is seeking entry into the site. Do you have legitimate claim, or does somebody said it's okay to collect data there if it's a school or such thing, right? And then you enter the site to collect data and document your procedures, such as collecting field notes on things that are important, etc. Number four, be ready and willing to modify your design and document modifications to your design. This workforce development, it was really just a little bit about the study on how this may apply to the study. I've been talking a little bit about the workforce study that I'm working on right now. We began that we were going to do a bunch of focus groups and some interviews, and it didn't really work out. We started with the interviews and we weren't really getting a lot of quality information. So we had to get back to the drawing board and we had to design a survey. Hopefully the survey going out to 100 people that's going to give us more important data. And so sort of on the fly, we were able to be nimble and be able to change our design, because ultimately we're focused on the ultimate outcome. The outcome is to get quality data on how these programs are working for people. And so regardless of modification of the design, we were okay with it as a team. Okay, data collection and sources. These are just some type of sources. You have obviously observations, interviews, questionnaires, phone calls, documents, photographs, recordings, drawings, journals, emails, blogs, etc. Nowadays with social media, if there's a way to capture the social media data for you to use in your research, feel free to do that if that's what you wanted to do. There's so many different types of data now that exist than when I was a doctoral student over 20 years ago. Okay, so this is just a sample. I know I've been talking quite a bit about triangulation. Almost in every class, I've talked about triangulation when we're looking at methods. Now, this is the sample of a study that I did. The study was on Latino. It was on youth, Latino male youth here in the Central Valley. And so this is, instead of, I was doing a lot of focus groups, but I didn't rely on just focus groups. I wanted to triangulate my data. So I collected literature on these Latino males here in the Central Valley. I analyzed the literature. I had a procedure for the analysis of the literature, policy reports. I had the quantitative data. I also had surveys. from leaders that were working with these youth. I had demographic questionnaires during the focus groups and the interviews. I had the focus group data, the transcriptions, post focus group discussions. Since I was training also a team of students after every focus group, they were there with me. We had discussions and we recorded them, and we used that data also as part of our data. We had focus group notes. We had a note taker there that took notes. We had interviews with the leaders that work with youth. We had interviews with them, post leader interview reflections. We had notes, interview notes from the note taker. And then we had analysis of findings from the advisory board leaders. We talked to advisory board leaders, we recorded the conversations, and we did analysis of those findings. So 11 points of data that we had. Okay. So data collection sources and techniques, right? For when you're observing, this is for ethnography. If you're observing, sometimes it's best is the best process to acculturate to the culture of an environment before proceeding to interviews or any other type of data collection. You got either participant observation and non-participant observation. And I think if you remember the story that I told you about when I was at the school, and this young lady was bullying this young student. In this school, you have to fight. If somebody looks at you a certain way, you have to fight. And I was a non-participant observation, and I interceded. I'm like, no, I can't let this stand. I can't just sit here when I know this is wrong and let this happen, right? And so I became a participant observation. These are the two primary modes of observation. And a participant observation, you're not just there to learn, you're there to become part of the environment. If you sit in the back row, they're going to forget you're there, and you're going to be a pat. But you can also help and use your specialization in any way to be active, blend in. The drawbacks is it's very difficult to observe when you're busy participating, right? But nevertheless, you got to measure what the environment calls for sometimes. Don't think that you're going to do one because you're better versed in that or you want to try that one. It's okay to begin to have a plan, but also be lenient, be ready to change your plan depending on what the environment calls for. Then you have the non-participant observation where the observer is not directly involved. The benefits is that it's less intrusive, you're less likely to become emotionally involved. And the drawbacks is that you're less connected and less likely to understand theoretical, social, and cultural constructs that are happening. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and skip this group activity, but if you want to just do it on your own, thinking about your own research, and if you're doing ethnographic work, what would be the pros and the cons of being either a participant or a non-participant observer? Okay, continuing with observations. This is, again, ethnographic field work, right? You got the field notes, right? The notes that you're taking. These can be recorded after you're done. You're in an environment. There's a lot of times when I was observing, and I've talked a lot about this study, the Latino therapeutic methodologies. I was taking field notes, but at the end of that observation, it was an hour and a half. I would go to my car and I would turn on my recorder and I would record some more sort of what were my impressions of the day in that observation. And so not only did I have the written notes, I also had the recordings. Okay, and then you have meta field notes. That's what we're talking about with these recordings. These are field notes about your data, right? Post-interview discussions, conversations, right? Like when I talked about the men and boys of color research that I did, I had a research team. We did focus groups. When everybody left, we had a discussion and we recorded it. Sometimes it was about the observations. Sometimes it was about the research team and what happened. What did we find? What did we see? Right? So those are meta field notes. Those are, it's data about your process and your notes. So then you got this is a typical field note protocol. Who are you observing? What's going on? What's present or new in the physical environment? What are some key and memorable things about the day? Remember, it's okay to begin site observation with little structure and then build the structure as you go. Keep descriptive and reflective field notes. Those are both important. Okay. Interviewing is really gathering data that is much more specific. It's structured. It's better than it's more structured than merely observing. You gather data when observation is not possible, which it isn't. You might want to do interviews, but when observation, but but when used with observation, the study can be strengthened if you do both interviews and some ethnographic work. And that's what, again, once again, triangulation. Okay. All right. Interviewing, you got three different types of interviews. The first one is unstructured interview. This is really used more by more expert researchers going in there without a protocol, right? This is really much more, a little bit more than a casual conversation. You're asking new teachers during lunch about their struggles. You don't have a protocol. You want to ask one or two questions to let them open up. You're really trying to establish rapport. You're trying to make this informal. You don't want to come off as a researcher that's really there just to take information. So those are really unstructured interviews. Then you got structured interviews here. Many times these are used with mixed method studies when the qualitative data is merely supplementary. So the higher the structure, the high structure is used as sort of verbal reiteration of what the quantitative is intended to capture. So example, if you're in an in-person survey, do you hope to continue to a second year of teaching? Yes or no, right? Very structured, right? Because of the high structure, it's also a good idea to do a pilot study to get the feedback on these type of questions. These are in a structured interview. Sometimes you can even do it through email. You send the interview questions and then you get the responses. Sometimes those are short responses. Sometimes they could be longer, but a lot of times they are short responses. Okay. And then you have semi-structured interviewing. This is not structured. It's not unstructured. It's in the middle. This is really what more sort of expert researchers are going to use. This is best for capturing complex theoretical knowledge and ideas and constructs. It's used by trained interviews. I don't know if you know these people anymore. Charlie Rose, Jay Leno, probably not. Those are kind of around my time. The people that I sort of learned from, qualitative researchers, are experts. I mean, they ask the right questions at the right time. It's all sort of built into the conversation. They know when to probe to get more information. It's really sort of very powerful when you see these semi-structured interviews that you think it's really just a conversation, but really they do have questions. You just don't see them looking down at their paper or the questions. They almost kind of remember, or they remember the themes or the things that they want to extract from that interview. Okay, guidelines for interviewing. You got to, again, rapport. Consider rapport and how you're going to gain rapport. Understanding that there's limitations, such as maybe if you're a male interviewing females about the female experience, that could provide some limitations. They may or may not want to tell you certain things if you're a male, but that's just sort of one example, right? You need to document your limitations if you see any, right? Let us know what those limitations are. You need to try to address these limitations. It's not just important to say, oh, well, I have a limitation that I'm a male. What are you trying to do to limit that limitation? Are you trying to, maybe not ask questions about the female experience, maybe ask questions about academics or other things that may not involve gender? Perhaps that's what you're trying to do, right? That's what you have to say, that this is a potential limitation. This is how I'm addressing it. You got to make sure that the interviewers are comfortable. You got to make sure that's why I like to interview people at their home, coffee shop near their house, wherever they feel most comfortable. You got to be comfortable with silence. Sometimes interviewers are thinking. They like to pause. You don't know how long they like to pause. You just have to be comfortable with not trying to speak over them and let them get their thoughts out. Remember, it's really about them. It's not about you. You're just the interviewer, right? You're just the person doing the interview. They're the interviewee, right? This is make sure the interviewees are comfortable. Sorry. All right. Control your nonverbals. Don't be, moving too much. Don't have a face of shock when they tell you something, extreme. Try not to, be too extreme in your body movements and your facial expressions, because that really does sort of guide that you're accepting what they say, or that you think what they're saying is very shocking. You may lead them down a rabbit hole that you don't want to do that. So you got to try to be as neutral as possible in your bodily and facial expressions. Okay. interviews, okay? Collecting data, your choices are taking note taking from the interviews, right? This is least optimal. You always, when you're doing an interview, you want to ask them, is it okay if I record the interview, which is down here, the recording the interview. That's the best option because you know exactly what they said, but they may say, no, I don't want you to record the interview. That is possible, right? And so in that sense, you have to really just take notes, right? Take notes and as best as you can, but make sure that you're still paying attention to them, that you're nodding, that you're affirming what they're saying. And you know, if you're not able to do that, you're gonna have to just really listen. Maybe as soon as you're done, go to your car, wherever you need to go, and away from the site, and take notes as much as you remember. That's the least optimal, the least accurate. But you know, those are different choices. You never know what's going to happen in the field when you're in the field doing these interviews. What's going to go wrong? You kind of try to plan for the best, but sometimes the worst happens. Things happen to you, and you have to be ready to adjust and on the fly. Okay, focus groups, right? We talked about focus groups too. This is when you're doing an interview with many different people at one time, right? This is the benefits is that you know you can the interviewers can feed off of each other. You know, one has an idea, others are like, that happened to me too, and this is how it was different for me. The drawback is that the interviews can be influenced by other people. There can be power relations if some people have more power or are a little bit older, whatever the case may be. And that's sort of generally one of the drawbacks. Things to remember is that homogeneity is very important. One time I was doing with the Men and Boys of Color study, we were interviewing young males that they were high school age, and somehow we got a middle school kid that got into the focus group, and somebody didn't check the age. Well, that kid really just sat there. He didn't really feel that, you know, he could talk over these high school kids. And so we knew that homogeneity from now on, homogeneity based on age is very important. These kids have to be 16, 17, and 18. If it's 15 and below, we got to put them in another focus group. Okay, think about being inclusive. Sometimes when you have quiet participants, think about perhaps calling them out, asking if they'd like to participate. And if some are, you know, dominating the conversation, make sure to try to spread it out. Say, well, how about you? You haven't said anything, you know, so that there's a little bit more diversity and democracy and the different voices. And it's just naturally some people like to talk and dominate conversations sometimes, and some like to really kind of hide and maybe say as little as possible. Okay, think about also documenting the participant voice, right? Such as what we like to do is we like to put name tags in front of people so that I can call them out, like, "Hey, Martin, what do you think?" Or, you know, "Jay, what do you think?" And that way we know exactly who's saying what. Okay, so the optimal size for a focus group is 3 to 5. Right? And this is cited by Morgan as the authority on focus groups. You can look up his work, David Morgan. He was actually my professor at the University of Michigan, so I learned to do focus groups from him. And but I mean, I've been doing, you know, much larger here in the Valley. In fact, the one that I'm doing this Thursday is going to be 8 to 10, and so I'm really not following my own advice. And so that's usually not going to be an hour focus group. That's going to be maybe an hour 30 to an hour 45 when you have that many people. Okay, this is how you document, you know, all the different people. You put, you know, name tags or a number in front of them, and you know, you call them out after they say something very important. You say, "Well, thank you very much, interviewer number 3," or you know, by their name, or you call them out before interview 5. What do you think? That way, their name and their title is connected to what's being said on the tape. Okay. This is just a sample of a focus group methodology. This was also from the Men and Boys of Color project that I did. You know, you have the things that you do before the focus group. You query the advisory board. You contact community leaders through phone and emails. You establish, you know, specifics and recruitment. You agree on the dates and times for the focus group. I always make site visits to where the focus group is going to be held to make sure that it's an adequate site for the focus group. During the focus group, you begin maybe, a lot of times we like to feed our participants, and Thursday we're going to be feeding them. Yeah, we check for make sure they have their Pre-focus group questionnaire completed, parental permission if it's needed. You explain the importance of participation, anonymity, and openness, and you conduct the focus group. Post-focus group, you discuss the highlights, you include site leaders in those discussions, you discuss any new findings, things that you didn't know that you learned, and then you relate those findings to past focus groups that you've already conducted on that topic. So this is our process for when we did that study. Okay, qualitative focus groups. This is sort of the process. You begin with a letter to introduce the study. Then you have the informed consent to make sure that they consent to the focus group. And generally, we like to have it in English and in Spanish. Then you have a demographic questionnaire that asks them about themselves, family, school, religion, employment, and health. Questions that are like yes and no type of questions. You don't want a questionnaire that's going to be too long. You want something that's short, that's 1 or 2 pages that they can fill out in just 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Then we have the interview, the semi-structured focus group interview. We have 3 layers of questions. We may have 20 questions, but only 5 or 6 are like, you got to get these questions in. Then you have maybe another 6 that, hey, you can ask these questions if there's time. And then you have maybe another 6 to 8 questions that, hey, if things are going slow and the responses are really short, maybe you can ask these questions. These are the areas of our questions that we asked them when we did the Men and Boys of Color study: self, family, neighborhood, religion, spirituality, health, school, aspirations, and about their reflections. Okay. How do we ask questions in the focus groups? Well, very carefully. That's sort of a funny comical thing, but really, you gotta, use techniques to assess and establish rapport. With the Latino males, what we did is we interviewed them using Spanglish. We jumped back and forth between English and Spanish. We had Latino male interviewers. The interviewee, we interviewed them in their preferred context. The setting of the interview context around was important to them. Semi-structured interviewing techniques. The questions are to guide the interviewee to take us where rich data exists. The interviewee probed for rich data. We knew where to probe when they said something that was unique. We please tell me more about that. Let's explore that a little bit more. So the analogy is you're like panning for gold, right? You're a miner, you're out there, pulling up dirt, panning for gold. You're not just going to go anywhere panning for gold. You're generally going to go where you think there's going to be gold, where people just recently found gold, or maybe where you found gold if you're a gold miner, right? You don't just go anywhere because you're going to be out there forever, panning for gold and not catch anything. You're more likely to find it where gold has already been found before, right? Okay. So these are rich data targets for sampling, right? This is based on the idea of you're panning for gold. You want to go where the gold is, right? Newspaper. What's the most important part? The important part of the newspaper? The front page, right? You can read the whole paper, but nothing's going to be more important. They put the most important stories in the front page. Journal articles, the abstract is the most important part. It tells you everything about the article in a paragraph. Comedians, right? Sometimes you got to wait 10 minutes for the punchline, but it really is about the punchline. I don't know if you guys have seen the show America's Biggest Loser, right? They take you like 20 minutes, talking, and they go through a commercial right before the weigh-in. You got to watch all the commercials. But really, everybody's there to see how many pounds this person lost this week, right? It really is, the weigh-in is really the most important part of the show. The baseball game, the final score. Ethical dilemmas is the solution. Bilingual discussions is really the code switching dialogue. And interviews and focus groups is the extraordinary, high volume, high intensity, highly emotional discussion that usually occurs sometime in between. You're in maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and you're going to notice that these type of things sort of emerge sometimes. Okay, this was the demographic questionnaire for the Men and Boys of Color. This is just a sample before we conducted the focus group. These are the questions that we asked about self, parents, school, college and university, church, employment, and health, right? Very, very basic type of questions. Okay. All right. Semi-structured interview. Remember I said we have questions that are, you got to ask these questions that you could ask, and questions that you only ask if you have time. So the one that's in higher font and it's in bold is the most important question, the one we have to ask. If you were to meet me on the streets and you wanted to leave a lasting impression, what is the one thing that you would want me to remember about you? It sets a precedent. It gives us an understanding of who they are, how they see themselves. It's going to determine quite a bit more of how this interview is going to go, or how this focus group is going to go. Could ask is, tell us about your relationship with your parents. How do you feel about this relationship, and how have they influenced you? Questions only you ask if you have time. Are there any terms that you use to describe yourself, such as Hispanic, Chicano, Latino, Mexican, American? And tell us a little bit about your race and ethnicity. Okay. All right. Email interviews, kind of a relatively new method, but maybe not so much, but not highly used, right? Because it's really sort of disconnected, from the interviewee. So it's used out of convenience. There's not that much research on this type of methodology. The advantages is you don't need to transcribe anything. They've already typed it up for you. And the challenge is it's really difficult to protect confidentiality and anonymity because you have a lot of email streams going back and forth. So, okay, the questionnaire really is the sort of like a survey, but intended to collect large amounts of open-ended data. You avoid lengthy questionnaires so that you don't have so much data to process. The good thing is for collecting data, large amounts of demographic type of data. If you're trying to triangulate your data, it's also good. The advantages is that when in-person data collection is not possible, right? The disadvantages is when it's done in conjunction with quantitative, because people are trained to really ignore these type of answers. Okay. When you're examining data, this is data that already exists. You're not collecting any data. Here are some sources, right? Artifacts, archival data, records, test scores, school newspapers, journals, people's journals, written journals, maps, pictures, videotapes, audio tapes, CD tracks, CDs, whatever you could get your hands on to help you understand if you're doing a historical project. So there's, an endless amount of already existing. Okay, for validity and reliability is, again, validity and reliability and qualitative, really what we're using is trustworthiness and understanding. Qualitative validity is a degree to which data accurately gauges what you're trying to measure. So this term is not really as popular as trustworthiness in the qualitative research. Understanding. Credibility is the researcher's ability to explain complex phenomenon. Transferability is people's ability to relate to your study. Dependability is people's ability to assess your design and find it to be a high quality design. And confirmability is people's ability to see the study and the research as sufficiently neutral and sufficiently objective. Okay, and these were Maxwell's criteria for qualitative research validity. I'm going to go ahead and let you review these. You have descriptive, interpretive, theoretical, and then transferability. Once again, that terminology we've been talking about. And evaluative validity is the ability of researchers to present data without unduly having a direct impact on the outcome. Okay, these are strategies for ensuring validity. And I put it in quotes because, again, we don't use that term in qualitative. We use transferability. Okay. You want prolonged time in the site. You want to be there for a while. You want to persistently observe, not just one or two observations. The more observations, the better. You want peer debriefings, either with other people, other researchers, other people in the site, or sometimes yourself if you don't have those people. You want to conduct member checks, right? Sending the transcription back to your participants and let them know, is this an accurate representation of what you said? Collecting detailed descriptive data, developing detailed descriptions of the context, establishing an audit trail, and practicing reflexivity, which is being open about the researchers, your biases, your intentions, etc. Reliability in your instruments, you're going to need to be able to be flexible and modify or add to your protocol as you gain more knowledge and understanding of your site. The literature review is going to help you in preparation, but the more prepared you are before entering the site, the less likely you are to need major modifications to your protocol. And so as an example, this work study that I'm doing right now, we went in there doing interviews. We had to modify our interview protocol after the first couple interviews because we were asking about BIPOC. BIPOC is a term that describes Black, Indigenous, people of color. Well, none of the people we were talking to knew what BIPOC was, so we needed to change the terminology. We had 2 or 3 questions that had BIPOC in them that needed to be changed, and we did that after 1 or 2 interviews. Okay. Again, generalizability in quantitative equals transferability in qualitative, and that's really the term we use. So thank you all very much for module 15, qualitative data collection, and I look forward to hearing you and your discussion and seeing you for next week, which will be the last week, I think. The last week in this class, but maybe not in other classes.